Hello and welcome to Quadriga. This week, Germans witnessed street clashes that reminded some of the mob violence that paved the way for the Nazis 90 years ago. Right-wing demonstrators rampaged through the streets of the eastern city of Chemnitz on Sunday, hunting down people they believed to be immigrants. Thousands assembled once again on Monday and clashed with counter-protesters. Local police and political leaders were clearly overwhelmed. Critics called their reaction too little and too late. The mass violence was triggered by the murder early Sunday morning of a German, allegedly at the hands of two Middle Eastern asylum seekers. Right-wing protest in Chemnitz. What is the root of this hate? That is our topic today on Quadriga. It's a pleasure to introduce our guests. And we welcome Karen Taylor. She's an expert on racism. She's a member of the SPD and heads its Committee on Migration and Diversity. And she says as long as Germany does not deal with its racism problem, more people will be hunted down because of their race, and not only in Chemnitz. And it's great to have my colleague Hans Pfeifer on the show. He works for DW as an expert on right-wing extremism, and he says Germany is facing a constitutional crisis. Politicians and citizens increasingly ignore the basic principles of Germany's core values. And finally, we're pleased to welcome back to the program Malte Lehming. He's a commentator for the daily newspaper, Der Tagesspiegel. And he says the events in Chemnitz are shocking and disgusting, but by and large, and especially in a European perspective, Germany coped with the refugee crisis quite well. More than 300,000 migrants have found a job, unemployment is low, the welfare system is strong. So welcome to all of you. And Hans, if you would, I'd like to start with what happened as far as we know the facts. How did we go from a nighttime stabbing to this kind of an escalation to mass violence and posses hunting down immigrants in the streets?
Well, as soon as the news was spreaded that somebody was killed, and that through social media people get the information that it probably could have been two refugees committing the crime, which is now under proof of the authorities. As soon as this happened, there had been insecurity in the population, and there spread the discussion about violence, about refugees as soon as this started. And as soon as this happened, the mobilization started through citizens of the city, but especially through right-wing groups, right-wing organizations, and they spread the news precisely to their affiliated groups also in other parts of Germany, trying to mobilize. Well, it's a mixture of a mob of the far right and demonstrators to protest in the city. And what then was taking place, that a mixture of emotions in this city because of the crime, together with well-organized neo-Nazis from all over Germany, were kind of taking over the city. And so what happened was not spontaneous, what was taking place in the city. It was this well-organized scheme we have observed in many other conflicts in cities wherever something terrible happened, which was used by organized neo-Nazi groups for their propaganda.
Malte, given the role of social media in escalating this and in steering it, would you say actually this is something that could have taken place anywhere? It just happened to be Chemnitz because that's where the stabbing occurred?
I would say these are two different questions. Is it something that is typical for the eastern part in Germany, or what the role of the social media is? I think social media fuels things very fast, because social media instantaneously gives informations, even wrong informations. It was even said in the beginning, the man who was murdered wanted to help a German girl from the immigrants and so on. All these things, which was actually false, and the police has no proof of that. But these things, if these things are spread through the social media, things are happening very, very fast. And I would say the demonstrations on Sunday were indeed more spontaneously than planned. On Monday, it was a totally different affair, and I agree completely. That was not spontaneously, this was organized. It happened in the East because the East is a special place for these things. I would say that anti-immigrant sentiments in the East are in part like in the West or in all over Europe. The state lost control of the borders, crime is high, unemployment goes up, the welfare state is ruined or something like this. But there's a special Eastern component to this. This has to do with GDR history, with the civil war rhetoric they're using. We are the people, the same rhetoric they used when they brought down the communist regime. So I think the anti-communism 30 years ago transformed into anti-establishment, anti-immigrant movement right now.
Karen, same question to you, essentially. The local authorities did say that neo-Nazis, right-wing groups poured in from all over Germany. Your initial statement talked about racism in places far beyond Chemnitz. Would you say that, in fact, this could have taken place elsewhere as well, or do you see a unique local element in this very virulent violence?
I think this could have happened anywhere, but the amount of violence which we see in Chemnitz and which we especially see in Saxony is kind of characteristic for this state, because we have authorities, we have local politicians who deny the existence of neo-Nazi groups, the existence of the high amount of racism within the state. We have seen a statement from the president of the state who is in completely deny. So I believe that it's linked to this lack of realization what is happening in his own state. On the other side, I would also say that we have a main problem in Germany as such to talk about racism, to talk about institutional racism, to talk about all-day racism. And as long as we close our eyes for this reality, I think this will happen or can happen anywhere.
I want to come back to the political response and to politics a bit later, but for now, let us start by hearing some voices from Chemnitz itself. How do the citizens see these events and the role of their city?
I'm disappointed in Chemnitz. Of course, it's all sad, but the reactions were just too right-wing.
Zu rechtslastig.
Chemnitz has changed for the worse.
I'm not part of a mob. I don't want anyone to think I am, even if I'm standing here. There's trouble here every evening. Groups confront each other. I don't want to say that it's only foreigners. You can't go into the city anymore without worrying about something happening to you.
I'm sad that this is happening here. It's getting out of hand. You feel unsafe going into the city as an ordinary citizen.
Hans, to what degree is right-wing xenophobia beginning to penetrate the mainstream, becoming acceptable even to people, to citizens who might think of themselves as absolutely middle of the road?
I think it's really popular right at the moment, but I'm not really surprised of what's going on because I think it was never absent. These racist sentiments in the society have never been away, and we faced like pogroms like this in the 90s in Germany. We had major attacks by right-wing terrorist groups, which were supported also by part of the mainstream, even in the 80s and 70s. We were facing a long tradition of a lack of empathy with the victims of this far right. So this is why I would think it's not surprising that they are that strong. But what I would think that right at the moment, what makes the situation quite even dangerous for the society is that there is kind of a mix of a combination of those who are like activists, right-wing activists with citizens, and that they're quite a lot of normal citizens, like they're not organized, they are like from the neighborhood, and they don't feel any trouble to march against refugees, against the government, side by side with people saluting Hitler. And this is, I think, it's not new, but it's becoming more and more dangerous.
Karen, surveys taken this week after the events in Chemnitz showed that a majority of Germans condemn the violence, condemn what happened there, but not a majority of people who support the right-wing AfD party, which is very strong in this particular region of Germany. Would you say that the AfD, which is now present in the Bundestag, is it essentially normalizing these right-wing xenophobic views?
Definitely, definitely. We have seen it in Chemnitz. It was the AfD who actually called for the first gathering on Sunday to mourn the person who died. Not only to mourn this person, but also to show the amount of rage and anger towards immigrants or so-called immigrants. So we've seen it in Chemnitz, but we also see it in the Bundestag as such. The language has changed. We also see it with the other parties. We saw it during the election campaign last year in Germany, that not only the AfD is on the complete right, but also with the other parties. We have to name the CDU. We also have to name the SPD when it comes to rhetorics. So I think it's very dangerous that the AfD has set a level, a standard, which is low and not protecting migrants or minorities in Germany.
I think I want to say one thing, because I think it's very important that this movement is not only anti-migrant. It's a major part of their beliefs, but it's far more than just anti-migrant, because they are opposing a liberal society where people we are talking about, they are not migrants. They are just people of different color, of maybe it's the grandparents that migrated to Germany. So they're not migrants anymore, only by law or by whatever statistic. And this is what makes it so dangerous. They are opposing part of the German citizens just because they have a different belief, they have a different religion. And this makes it
We're going to hear
dangerous.
exactly that a bit later on. Malte, when I come back to those particular voices, we heard two people saying they don't feel secure on the streets of their city. Do you have some sympathy for that sense of insecurity that was expressed there? It was very clear that the police in Chemnitz were absolutely overwhelmed by what happened and completely inadequately prepared.
The police on Sunday evening were 591 police officers confronting 6,000 right-wing demonstrators, protesters, and left-wingers as well, who protest as anti-fascists against them. So they were really underestimating the level of organizing that was shown by the right-wing or anti-immigrants on the street. So I think there was a failure of state, a failure of having a clear picture of what happened in their own town. This is one thing. The other thing is, no, I don't have sympathy for them. There is something that, I mean, if in a couple of months more than 1 million refugees are pouring into a country, then I think a certain kind of level being concerned about the impacts is quite normal. We see it in every European state. Saxony borders Poland and Hungary. Both are governed by right-wing populist parties, and if you add the Italy and Austria and Scandinavian countries and the success of Le Pen in France and so on, there is a kind of non-German aspects to it. There's a European aspect to this. I would say these are normal, but the facts don't come close. Crime rate is at its lowest level since unification in Germany. The surplus in the budget is going up and up. Unemployment hasn't risen, it has decreased since the influx of Germans. So all these things have to be communicated to the public. And I think that's a lack of the government. They don't do it as strongly as they could.
Hans, a lot of people have been saying in the wake of the Chemnitz events that surplus in the budget should be dedicated much more to supporting the security services. We have seen persistent cuts in police budgets all over Germany in recent years. Would you say, looking at what happened in Chemnitz, that the failings of the police were material in the sense of being understaffed, tactical, or political?
I think, well, they are understaffed. I think I would not like to be a policeman in Saxony, because they all have, in all the different states in Germany, they have problems with being quite badly staffed. But I think it's a political problem at its core, and that's because we've seen so many places where quite similar situations were started to grow or to come out, but police managed pretty well to control the situation, because they had a better reaction, or a better political reaction, because they said we have to do everything we can to get the situation under control. And if and that's what police read in the social media as well as journalists, because we were all sitting in our office reading social media like, oh my God, look at all these right-wing groups. They are mobilizing all over Germany. This will be really tough. Let's send our reporters to Chemnitz because it will be a day of violence. And so it's hard to believe that the police was not following all these accounts. So I would say it's a wrong political decision, because they are not aware and they don't have the empathy. That's what I would think. They have a lack of empathy with the troubles neo-Nazis could make, because mostly they are not the target of their violence.
And they might be understaffed, but they always could have asked the federal police for help.
Exactly.
And in fact, we do have some indications that the police and other officials, at least in Saxony, may themselves be susceptible to right-wing extremist views. A case in Dresden has been making headlines in August at a demonstration by the anti-immigrant group Pegida, protesting Chancellor Angela Merkel's refugee policy. A demonstrator asked police to prevent a television crew from filming him. The police honored his demand, and then it emerged that that demonstrator was a member of the Saxony State Criminal Police who just happened to be taking part in the protest in his free time. Karen Taylor, would you say there is a major problem with too much proximity between some members of the police, at least in this eastern region of Germany, and right-wing groups themselves?
Definitely. We've seen it with the NSU terror cell, the group which wasn't discovered by the state police, but rather discovered itself. We've seen it with this example just shown here. And I would say, if we talk about security, we also have to talk about the security of people who are not white in this country. Because if there's a lack of security, right now, there's definitely a lack of security in Chemnitz for me. There are so-called no-go areas everywhere in this country, even in Berlin, in the capital of Germany. So I believe if we talked about lack of empathy, I would say it's a lack of protecting basic human rights for people who are living in this country. So that is one of the major issues here. But then again, in Chemnitz and also Saxony itself, we've already talked about that. This development from coming from a GDR, which was kind of enclosed. If we also look at the numbers, there are not so many migrants. There are not so many people of color.
This is the region where we have the fewest foreign residents pro capita.
Exactly.
That seems like an enormous paradox. Can you explain that?
It's very well researched.
Yeah,
it's a basic component.
7% in Chemnitz.
Yeah,
absolutely.
and that where there's a lack
Munich.
of, where there's migration at its low, then those xenophobic or racist thoughts are at a high.
You can maybe explain it with Martin Luther King, who said, if there's no contact, there's fear. So I guess it's also, and then again, being part of a political party, I say the politicians have a great responsibility here. We live in a globalized economy, globalized world. Of course, migration and diversity it's everyday life. So to portray that Germany is a white enclosed country is just wrong. So we need to change this rhetoric about us being protected by everything which happens around us, and rather be honest to ourselves and say, yeah, migration is a reality, and we'll have people coming in and out of the country.
I would like briefly to add 2 points which might be special in Saxony and the east of Germany. First of all, with the 40 years of GDR government rules there, how was National Socialism taught in schools as a Western affair? Has nothing to do with GDR history, nothing to do with the Eastern history. The Nazis were part of the Western society, not of the East. So this, I think, caused a tremendous lack of understanding for the roots of racism and National Socialism and these things. The second point is solidarity. When the influx of refugees were in the fall of 2015, basically the German government asked all the Germans for help and for support and show solidarity with these people. Showing solidarity from bottom up was part of the GDR rhetoric. Solidarity with other communist Russians, Cubans, and so on and so on. So they get a sort of they are anti-solidarity feelings because they were forced to show solidarity in the first place 30 years ago.
Perhaps one of the paradoxical aspects is to see in a region that had been communist a swing to a kind of German nationalist thinking that many people assumed was long over. Let's take a look at one more incident that occurred in the region of Saxony. Last weekend, the right-wing identitarian movement held a festival in Dresden. Our colleague, Jafar Abdul Karim, was there. He spoke with activists and other visitors at the event and ultimately became a target of racism himself.
I want Germany to stay Germany.
What does that mean?
It means what I said. If you don't understand that, that's your problem. Then you've got a big problem.
I'm an immigrant.
Okay, then you're just a German citizen.
But not a German or part of German society or the German people?
From my point of view, you don't belong to the German people. Keep the camera on. I know how this works.
How does it work? Explain.
It's simple. You cut out only what you need and broadcast it. You know what? If you don't like it here, then go somewhere you like better. Go back where you came from.
Hans, it's interesting to hear one of the speakers in that incident deprecating German citizenship, essentially saying you're only a German citizen. It is troublingly reminiscent for many of us of that old blood and soil idea of what it means to be a German.
This is why I think that we have a constitutional crisis, because these voices, they have a strong voice now in the parliaments of Germany with the far-right AfD, and they're becoming more and more popular, and they could even win elections in some regions in Germany. And because they started to bring up this topic that like blaming Germans as not German just because of their skin color, just because of their name, just because they have dark hair or whatever, just because of their religion, that they start to disfavor them to other Germans, and that they separate. And I think this is really dangerous. If those people who've started this will get the power and will do the laws, then we will see a different Germany than we have nowadays.
Karen, this week the UN Commissioner for Human Rights expressed his enormous dismay over what was happening in Chemnitz and said he wants to see a much stronger response and real action from politicians all over Europe, but also in Germany. Now, we have heard some strong words from German leaders this week, but what specifically do they need to do more? And I'm asking you also, as a member of the Social Democratic Party, which is one of the parties that is governing in Saxony, what would you want to see your party doing that it's not doing now?
There are several things I would like my party to do. For one, I'd like to talk about representation. If you look at the SPD and different political parties in Germany, they don't really represent the people in Germany, because if we look at them, it's mostly white and mostly male. So we need to foster and need to start with talking to the people who belong to this country as well, and in order to foster them and push them into political responsibility. This is one major issue we have with all the political parties, including the SPD. Another thing is we need to talk about racism, not only in the connection of neo-Nazis and right-wing extremism, but really talk about the issue as such. See racism as a structural problem, as a problem of privileges for one part of the country and disadvantages for the other country, for the other part. So we really need to talk about what it means to actually tackle racism and not only right-wing extremism. That's another part. And the third thing I would suggest is to really look at these, look at these cells, really look at these areas in Germany which are troubled. We don't want to put all of Eastern Germany into one pot, but it's not a coincidence that this has been happening again and again in Saxony. So we really need to look at these different cells.
In one word, do you fault the SPD leaders in Saxony for not taking a stronger stand?
I mean, we see CDU leadership in Saxony. So for that, yes, I do blame the CDU leadership, definitely.
Thank you very much. Malte, Lehming, Hans, 2 sentences. What do the politicians need to do that they're not doing now?
You strongly have to point out to the successes of integrating many, many refugees in work, in labor, in languages and things like that. And they don't have to give them the chance to show themselves to be pro-German. They are anti-German as well.
Hans?
Politics have to strengthen and support those in those small little rural parts of Germany who are opposing this violence, who are opposing the far right and who are opposing racism.
Thank you very much to all of you for being with us, and thanks to you out there for tuning in. See you soon.